In espionage, truth is not eliminated. It is buried alive, breathing just enough to haunt those who touched it. Every intelligence war begins the same way, not with gunfire, but with trust misplaced. In the late 1990s, as the Middle East simmered beneath the surface of diplomatic smiles and back-channel negotiations, a single act of deception unfolded so quietly that no alarms were triggered, no borders were crossed in panic, and no weapons were drawn. Yet when it was over, a general who had shaped wars with a stroke of his pen would never walk the same again. The city was not at war. That was the first illusion. It was a European capital, clean streets, regulated traffic, the dull comfort of neutrality. A place where men like him felt safe enough to lower their guard. General Farid al-Khalil had survived coups, purges, and 3 assassination attempts in his home country. He had watched rivals disappear into prisons without names. He had ordered operations that left no witnesses. And now, temporarily assigned as a military liaison under a diplomatic veil, he believed himself untouchable. That belief would cost him everything. From an apartment overlooking a narrow side street, 2 floors above a bakery that opened at dawn, a woman watched the general's routine form itself into a pattern. She was not Israeli, at least not on paper. Her passport said Eastern European. Her accent leaned Mediterranean when she spoke English, and softened when she spoke French. To her neighbors, she was a licensed massage therapist specializing in rehabilitative treatment for high-ranking clients. To the front desk clerks who recommended her discreetly, she was professional, quiet, and forgettable. Forgettable was the point. Inside Mossad, she had no name anymore, only a designation buried inside a compartment no wider than necessity. Her handlers referred to her as the asset, never the operative. Language mattered. It created distance. Distance preserved deniability. Her training had begun years earlier, long before the general's name appeared in red ink on an assessment file marked strategic disruption, NO, and lethal. She had learned anatomy not as a healer, but as a map. Nerve clusters, spinal thresholds, pressure points where damage could be induced slowly, ambiguously, mistaken for natural causes, stress, age. What she carried was not poison, not a blade, not a firearm. What she carried was knowledge precise enough to destroy a man without leaving a crime scene. The general never noticed her surveillance. That was another illusion. His own counterintelligence unit had cleared the city weeks earlier. No hostile tales, no known Mossad safe houses nearby, no chatter intercepted. He traveled with minimal security, 1 aide, 1 driver, rotated irregularly. He prided himself on unpredictability. What he did not account for was patience. Mossad had waited nearly 18 months for this window. The inciting incident came quietly, buried inside a classified briefing in Tel Aviv. Satellite imagery had confirmed the general's involvement in accelerating a weapons program that threatened to shift the regional balance. Direct action was ruled out. An assassination would provoke retaliation. Exposure would only strengthen his standing at home. The solution required something more elegant, something that would remove him from the board without creating a martyr. Neutralization without attribution, the director had said. No applause followed, only nods. The massage therapist entered the picture weeks later. The general's back had begun to trouble him, chronic pain from an old injury aggravated by long flights and the constant tension of command. Embassy staff recommended her. She was discreet, trusted, already vetted by local authorities. Her clinic records were flawless. Her online presence was bland to the point of invisibility. Their first meeting lasted 45 minutes. She said little, asked the right question, applied pressure carefully, therapeutically. The general left feeling relief and something else he couldn't place. Trust, perhaps, or control regained. He scheduled another session. That night in a secure apartment miles away, the operative transmitted a single coded phrase through a dead channel long thought abandoned. Contact established. Subject receptive. Across the city, an intercept team not affiliated with Mossad flagged an anomaly, a ghost signal brushing against old Cold War infrastructure. It was faint, almost nothing, logged, not escalated. That was the moment the shadow began to move. The general slept soundly, unaware that the war had already reached him, not with bombs or bullets, but with hands trained to heal, and a silence designed to cripple more than his body. By the time the second appointment was scheduled, multiple intelligence services were unknowingly watching the same street, each convinced they were alone, and none of them yet understood what was about to be taken from them. In intelligence work, the most dangerous moment is not contact, it is comfort. Comfort convinces men they are safe. Comfort convinces them they are in control. By the time General Farid al-Khalil returned for his second session, comfort had settled in. The clinic was quiet, deliberately so. Soft lighting, neutral colors, nothing memorable. The woman greeted him with the same calm professionalism, the same faint smile that revealed nothing. She asked about his pain, his sleep, his travel schedule, questions that sounded medical but mapped his life with surgical precision. To the general, she was a civilian. To Mossad, she was a precision instrument already in motion. Her cover life was airtight. Every morning she walked the same route, bought the same coffee, nodded to the same shopkeeper. Every afternoon she treated ordinary clients, office workers, retirees, minor athletes, reinforcing the banality of her existence. Surveillance teams from rival agencies passed her without a second glance. She was noise in a city full of it. But beneath the routine, a second life ran in parallel. Each evening alone, she reviewed mental checklists drilled into her over years of training: pressure depth, angle variance, timing windows. She rehearsed not actions but restraint. The mission did not call for immediate damage, it called for plausibility. For gradual deterioration that could never be definitively traced back to human intent. This was not an assassination, this was erasure. Across the city, the general's own intelligence officers were uneasy. Not because of her, but because of nothing. Silence in their world was never neutral. The faint signal anomaly flagged earlier resurfaced again once every few nights, always brief, always vanishing before triangulation. Someone was using legacy infrastructure, someone experienced. Suspicion began to circulate quietly through diplomatic channels. The CIA station logged it as a curiosity. MI6 noted it and moved on. The local service archived it under unresolved. Mossad said nothing, as always. The psychological duel had begun long before either side acknowledged it. During the third session, the operative adjusted her technique. A slight increase in pressure near the cervical spine. A longer hold near nerve roots that governed balance and coordination. Nothing dramatic. Nothing painful. The general mentioned mild dizziness afterward. She reassured him: dehydration, stress, age. He accepted the explanation because it preserved his self-image. Men like al-Khalil did not believe they could be compromised by something so mundane. Between sessions, Mossad handlers monitored from afar, never directly, never repeatedly. They did not need eyes on the operative, they needed eyes on the effect. Medical reports filtered through unofficial channels. A discreet inquiry with a sympathetic doctor. A flag raised in an insurance database. Each data point confirmed the same thing: something was changing. Inside Mossad headquarters, a senior analyst summarized it in a single line: functional degradation has begun. Yet the web extended beyond the general. His aide, younger, sharper, more paranoid, began noticing inconsistencies. Missed meeting, subtle lapses in memory. A stumble on embassy stairs brushed off as fatigue. The aide requested a routine security sweep. Nothing was found, no listening devices, no hostile surveillance. That absence of evidence unsettled him more than confirmation would have. Meanwhile, another agency entered the picture unintentionally. A former KGB counterintelligence officer, now consulting privately, reviewed the intercepted ghost signals for a European service. His conclusion was brief and unsettling. The transmissions bore the hallmarks of Israeli tradecraft from an earlier era, techniques designed to be dismissed as obsolete. Either they're amateurs, he said, or they want you to think they are. That assessment was never officially shared. Bureaucracy slowed it down, clearance debates delayed it. By the time it reached a decision-maker, the general had already scheduled his 6th appointment. During that session, something shifted. The operative felt it immediately: a subtle tremor beneath her hands, a delayed response in muscle resistance. The general complained of numbness radiating down one arm. She paused the session early, citing concern. She advised rest, medical consultation. He laughed it off, thanked her, and insisted on continuing weekly treatments. Trust had fully replaced caution, but the web was tightening around her as well. A man began standing across the street some mornings. Different face each time, same posture. Casual but observant, not Mossad, not local. Someone else had finally noticed the pattern. Her handlers adjusted protocols instantly. No transmissions, no deviation. If compromised, the operation would be cut, even if incomplete. Mossad doctrine was clear: assets were expendable, exposure was not. The operative understood this without being told. That night, alone in her apartment, she packed a contingency bag, not to flee but to disappear. A second identity, a third. Roots memorized years ago surfaced effortlessly. She felt no fear. Fear had been trained out of her long ago. What she felt instead was focus, the narrowing clarity that came before irreversible acts. The next day, the general collapsed briefly during a private briefing. Doctors blamed exhaustion, stress, hypertension. They recommended rest. He ignored them. Power had always rewarded defiance, but inside his body, pathways were failing deliberately, methodically. By now, multiple agencies were circling the same truth from different angles, each too cautious to name it aloud. This was not natural. This was not coincident. Someone was inside his life, and yet none of them suspected the woman whose hands had become invisible. The operative sent her final preparatory signal that evening, a phrase embedded in an innocuous online booking confirmation routed through 3 countries. Threshold approaching. In Tel Aviv, the file was updated. Status changed from observation to execution phase. The next session would no longer be about preparation, it would be about consequence. And somewhere in the city, a rival intelligence officer finally reached the conclusion he had been avoiding: that the most dangerous operations did not arrive with force but with care. The trap was closing. No one knew yet who it would catch first. Every covert operation has a moment where theory collapses into reality, a point where planning ends and consequence begins. For this operation, that moment arrived without drama. No alarms, no raised voices. Only a quiet room, controlled breathing, and hands that had already memorized the damage they were about to finalize. The general arrived late for his 8th session. That alone was unusual. His aide waited outside this time, not by accident, not by protocol, but by instinct. He had begun to trust no space fully, no civilian completely. Yet even suspicion has blind spots. The aide watched the hallway, the exits, the reflections in polished surfaces. He did not watch the room itself. Inside, the operative noted the general's condition instantly. His gait was uneven, his left shoulder sagged. His eyes betrayed irritation, not fear, but frustration at a body that no longer obeyed him. Men like Al-Khalil did not fear death. They feared loss of command. She spoke calmly, guiding him onto the table. Routine movements, predictable steps. The environment remained sterile, controlled exactly as it had been every time before. That familiarity disarmed him more effectively than force ever could. As her hands made contact, she adjusted position by millimeters. This phase required precision beyond even her training simulations. Too much pressure would cause immediate collapse, too obvious. Too little would prolong recovery, unacceptable. The goal was permanent impairment masked as catastrophic medical failure. Outside the room, the city continued its rhythm. Inside, silence thickened. She focused on a specific convergence point where inflammation, repeated micro-trauma, and induced neural stress had weakened the body's defenses. It was not a strike. It was a release, allowing accumulated damage to complete itself. The general inhaled sharply. Pain flared, not sharp, not clean, but disorienting. His vision blurred. His fingers curled involuntarily. He tried to speak. His tongue refused precision. This was the breach. For the first time, he felt something he could not command. She stepped back instantly, protocol flawless, raised her voice just enough to summon attention. Panic performed, not felt. The aide rushed in. Medical staff were called. Emergency services arrived within minutes. By the time paramedics reached him, the general could no longer stand. In the ambulance, monitors registered neurological distress with no clear cause. No toxins, no trauma, no external indicators. The diagnosis would take days, and even then it would never arrive fully. In intelligence headquarters across 3 continents, red phones rang almost simultaneously. Mossad received confirmation first: indirect, sanitized, stripped of emotion. Subject compromised, non-lethal, outcome achieved. In Moscow, analysts revisited old intercepts with sudden clarity. In Washington, a senior officer closed a file and opened another, one marked "Do not attribute." Inside a private hospital wing, the general stared at his own hands, willing them to move. They did not. Doctors spoke in cautious language: nerve failure, spinal complications, rare neurological cascade. They avoided certainty. Certainty invited blame. Blame invited questions no one wanted answered. Within 48 hours, he was quietly removed from his post. Officially medical leave, unofficially neutralized, but the breach had consequences beyond the target. The aide disappeared from public view days later, reassigned, interrogated, blamed. Internal purges rippled through the general's organization. Trust collapsed inward. Files were sealed. Careers ended without explanation. And the operative, she vanished before dawn. No farewell, no extraction team, no visible movement. One day the clinic was open. The next, the lease was terminated, records archived, digital traces scrubbed to legal perfection. To the city, she had simply moved on. To Mossad, she had completed her function. Yet even in success, the operation left an aftershock. A rival intelligence service now understood the method, not fully, but enough to fear repetition. Medical professionals whispered about cases that defied explanation. Senior officials canceled routine appointments, changed habits, tightened circles. Control had shifted subtly, permanently. The general would live, but he would never command again, never intimidate a room, never shape policy with presence alone. He had been removed without martyrdom, the most effective erasure intelligence could achieve. And in the quiet aftermath, one truth settled across agencies like dust after an explosion. Power could be dismantled not only by force, but by patience. In intelligence work, victory is never announced. It is absorbed quietly, uneasily, by institutions trained to fear their own reflection. The morning after General Farid al-Khalil was removed from public view, 3 different narratives were released across 3 capitals. Each one contradicted the others. Each one was incomplete. Together they formed the shape of a lie everyone agreed to maintain. Officially, the general had suffered a sudden neurological collapse exacerbated by stress and age. Privately, his name was removed from future planning documents. Strategically, his absence created a vacuum no one was prepared to fill. Inside his own organization, panic did not arrive loudly. It crept. Meetings were canceled. Phones went unanswered. Officers avoided eye contact in hallways lined with portraits of men who had once seemed permanent. Counterintelligence units turned inward, interrogating their own methods with a desperation that bordered on paranoia. How did this happen? Who was closest to him? What did we miss? The questions spiraled without resolution because the answer did not fit the framework they understood. There was no mole, no poisoned drink, no intercepted convoy. The enemy had not penetrated their wall. It had waited inside them. The aide, already isolated, became the first casualty of blame. He was interrogated for days under the guise of routine debriefing. His loyalty was dissected, his past scrutinized, his instincts second-guessed. When no evidence emerged, suspicion hardened into resentment. He was reassigned to a desk with no influence, a professional exile. In intelligence culture, that was a verdict. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, the reaction was restrained to the point of coldness. The operation was reviewed not for its success, but for its exposure risk. Analysts dissected timelines, medical outcomes, signal discipline. They debated one question relentlessly: had the method been revealed? The conclusion was cautious but confident. Attribution remained impossible. Proof remained absent. Deniability remained intact. Still, unease lingered. One senior Mossad officer summarized it in a closed briefing. "We achieved the objective, but we've taught them something: that vulnerability doesn't require access, only proximity." That lesson would echo far beyond this operation. The operative herself did not return to headquarters. She was not celebrated. She was not interviewed on camera. She was quietly rotated into obscurity, a desk role under a name that no longer connected to her past. This was not punishment, it was protection. In intelligence, anonymity after success was the highest reward, yet isolation came with a cost. She slept poorly, not from guilt. Guilt had been stripped from her long ago, but from awareness. Awareness that she had crossed a threshold few operatives ever did. She had not pulled a trigger. She had not watched a target die. She had dismantled a man's future with hands trained to comfort. That contradiction lingered. Across Europe, quiet directives were issued. Senior officials reduced non-essential medical exposure. Background checks for civilian service providers were expanded beyond reason. Old Cold War manuals were dusted off, retranslated, re-examined. The idea that care itself could be weaponized unsettled institutions built on predictable threat models. In Moscow, a retired intelligence chief offered a blunt assessment during a closed-door session. This wasn't an operation, it was a message. In Washington, analysts reached a similar conclusion, framed differently. This changes how we define access. The fallout extended into doctrine. Training programs were updated, case studies rewritten. The operation, unnamed, unattributed, became a hypothetical scenario whispered about in secure rooms. Imagine, instructors would say, that the threat isn't the meeting or the flight or the escort, but the moment you relax. As for General al-Khalil, his days contracted. Confined to rehabilitation facilities and private residences, he watched his world shrink. Allies stopped calling. Rivals moved into his territory without resistance. His legacy was rewritten quietly, not erased, but diminished. He knew, even without proof, this was not fate, this was design. In rare moments of candor with a trusted physician, he asked questions no report could answer. The physician avoided them. Truth offered no treatment. The most damaging fallout, however, was internal. His organization grew brittle. Paranoia replaced cohesion. Every relationship carried suspicion. Loyalty was questioned not by evidence but by proximity. Operations slowed. Decisions stalled. Fear of unseen manipulation paralyzed initiative. This, Mossad understood, was the true victory. Not the fall of one general, but the corrosion of certainty. And yet, even within Mossad, discomfort persisted. One internal review concluded with a line that was never meant to be quoted. We removed a threat without violence, but we expanded the battlefield into places we may one day fear ourselves. That acknowledgement was buried, because intelligence agencies do not dwell on morality, they dwell on outcomes. And the outcome was clear. A single hidden act had altered the balance without firing a shot. Still, no one involved felt safe. Success had not brought closure, only awareness. Awareness that the most devastating wars were no longer fought in shadows alone, but in the intimate spaces where vigilance surrendered to trust. And once that line was crossed, there was no returning to the old rules. Time does not expose secrets. It erodes the walls built to contain them. Years passed before the operation acquired a shape that could be discussed, and even then only in fragments. No single document ever described it in full. No official acknowledgement followed. Instead, the story surfaced the way intelligence truths always do, through patterns, anomalies, and the quiet testimony of those trained never to speak directly. By the mid-2000s, historians studying unexplained shifts in regional power noticed something peculiar. Strategic momentum had changed without a corresponding military event. Programs once aggressively advanced stalled. Command structures reshuffled without internal revolt. The removal of General Farid al-Khalil, attributed publicly to illness, marked an inflection point that statistics alone could not explain. Former intelligence analysts speaking anonymously years later would refer to it obliquely. The general didn't fall, one said. He was made irrelevant. Within Mossad, the operation became a reference case, not a triumph to celebrate, but a standard to measure restraint. New recruits studied it without names attached. Instructors emphasized what wasn't done as much as what was. No explosion, no confession, no attribution, just outcome. The method reshaped doctrine across agencies far beyond Israel. Western intelligence services expanded their concept of access to include proximity without intent. Medical personnel, consultants, caregivers, once considered low risk, were reclassified under new threat models. Training manuals quietly acknowledged a reality long resisted, that the human body itself had become a battlefield. In Moscow, an internal review concluded that traditional counterintelligence had failed not because of incompetence, but because it was looking for the wrong kind of enemy. We were guarding doors, the report noted. They used touch. The legacy extended into geopolitics. Without al-Khalil's influence, rival factions gained ground, decisions slowed, aggressive postures softened. Negotiations previously dismissed reopened under new leadership less defined by personal authority. The balance did not collapse, it recalibrated. One man's absence had changed the tempo of conflict. The operative who executed the mission disappeared completely from institutional memory. Her file was sealed, then fragmented, then archived under categories so broad they dissolved into bureaucracy. This too was deliberate. In intelligence, anonymity is immortality. She lived under a different name in a different place, contributing quietly to training programs that would never credit her. She never spoke of the operation, Not because she was ordered not to, but because there was nothing to add. The mission had not required belief, only discipline. Years later, during a rare academic symposium attended discreetly by former intelligence officers, a retired MI6 analyst posed a question that lingered long after the session ended. If a war is won without violence but leaves everyone more afraid, was it a victory or a warning? No one answered. The general died quietly years after his removal from power. His obituary listed achievements, medals, and service. It did not mention the final decade of irrelevance. History prefers clean narratives, but within intelligence circles his case remained a footnote that refused to fade. A reminder that control does not always announce its arrival. That obsession blinds even the powerful. That trust, once weaponized, cannot be reclaimed. The narrator's voice, calm and unyielding, closes the file not with judgment, but with reflection. Empires do not always fall to force. Sometimes they fracture in silence when those who see too much choose not to speak, and those who touch too gently leave scars no weapon can match. The world moves on. The shadows remain.